Thank you, Rob. And hey, everybody, my name is Drew, and I am an alcoholic. Just set up screen share and kind of was pulling. I was in a rabbit hole, so we should be good to go. Um, and this is kind of one subject that really kind of is close to my heart because when we look at this stuff, especially when we look at what they had in their kind of zenith, the Oxford group with practices such as morning quiet time and guidance checking, sharing his witness, basically speaker meeting, testifying. And when you read a lot of that amazing literature, a lot of that stuff is actually applicable today. And one book particular is called the Morning Quiet Time, and it's an incredible read resource. And even we were talking earlier about when what it relates to with the four absolutes in step 10, and we'll cover all of that. But again, I'm trying to recall why that date is there. I think it kind of originally ended off around 1933 when the Oxford group comes to Akron. But we definitely have added a lot to it since then, and kind of goes from here. Now, when we look at the application of somewhat of the Oxford group, we kind of I like to use this alcoholic puzzle, and basically it breaks everything down into the three components. I think Joe and Charlie used it originally, and it just kind of went from there. But it breaks down the problem, and from Silkworth we learned the obsessional nature of alcoholism plus the allergy of the body. And essentially, when you boil it down, that is step one. Now, if and the problem being powerlessness. Now, powerlessness is the problem. There's got to be a solution, and that is obviously a power. And step two, and that basically hails from William James, Carl Jung, Leach. At least the story goes to Roland Hazard, Ebby Thatcher, the whole nine yards. But it's really fascinating when just knowing step one, the problem and the solution doesn't always get you there. In fact, it doesn't get you there, and that's where the third component, and that's the practical program of action. And this is where the Oxford group really kind of has steps in and kind of takes the ball and runs with it. And when we apply that to our steps, it starts out with the step three, surrender, and it basically goes all the way through, absolutely step 11, but step 12. So all, from 3 through 12 is can be traced back to the Oxford group. Now, when we look at the Oxford group, who founded the Oxford group? And of course, this is kind of going to be a deep dive, but we're just going to run with it. But we're looking at Frank Buchman. His full name was Frank Nathan Daniel Buchman. He was the founder of the Oxford Group. Now, what is the Oxford Group? Simply put, it was a spiritual movement, and the AA distinction, of course, is a God of your own understanding. Now, he was actually a Pennsylvania kid. He was born on June 4th of 1878, and you can actually see his parents here, Sarah and, of course, Franklin Buckman. It's described that he was born kind of in a farm with a train track that was literally in his backyard, and that was from the Initiatives of Change webs archives. And it's described that Frank would actually sit, kind of in his backyard, watch the trains go by, and he'd always, wonder where they are going, what adventures they are off to, and it was something that kind of set with him. And so, again, that was his earliest upbringing, and of course, Pennsburg, Pennsylvania. While he was there, he attended school. At the age of 8, he went to the Pickle Seminary, which is a heavy leaning Lutheran run institution in Pennsburg. Now, here's the thing, he did very well, but Pennsburg did not have a high school. And so his family, again, following the tradition of doing the best for their kids, they basically picked up and moved shop, and they actually moved to Allentown, Pennsylvania, where he attended high school at the Allentown High School. And of course, he ended up living here at 17 North 11th Street in downtown Allentown. And when we look at again quick little bio of his family seen here, especially Sarah Buchman was his mother. She was a very devout Lutheran mother, like really devout. We also have his father, Franklin Buchman Sr., who was described as an ex-hotel owner. He also opened a restaurant, was a saloon and wholesale liquor salesman. So that must have been an interesting conversation at dinner time. And of course, his brother, who was actually his adopted nephew, unknown of the exact story, Dan Buchman. But here you can see family Buchman. And of course, he went to Allentown and high school, did very well, and kept, kind of climbing up the ladder. From there, he actually attended Muhlenberg College, and some interesting. This is a very heavy Lutheran institution, and from here, he did very well, but he kind of followed the pull towards the clergy, have you. And got into Lutheran Theological Seminary. Now, it's interesting. Something happened to this particular aspect that'll come into play with the steps, especially, I think I talked about sharing his witness. He actually got in trouble at the institution because one of the things he didn't like sharing what his ideas was, and they would all get around and basically share these ideas of what the clergy is going to mean to them in the future. And Frank didn't like doing that, and he kind of kept quiet to himself. And they basically said they had this practice called testifying, and if he's not going to testify, then you can't be a Lutheran minister, because that's pretty much what it's all about. And so they told him, if you're not going to do this, then you can't stay. And so he tried it, and he actually had an amazing experience with it. He kind of thought, this is an amazing, little group of folks that I can, talk to, and we're all talking about God. So there was something that happened at this particular time when he was going through college. He graduated, of course, opened up, and really kind of, once he started talking, again, he was always kind of, even at this time frame, thinking big, and it goes from there. Now, on September 10th of 1902, he was actually ordained as a Lutheran minister at St. John's Church in Pennsylvania. In fact, from there, he actually landed in a Philly suburb called Overbrook, literally to set up shop. He became pastor in literally a corner, like, storefront church. It was called Church of the Good Shepherd, and this was around 1902 to 1905 that he was there. But something else that he did that also, kind of really fueled his soul. He opened up a boys' home. Originally, it was called the first one was the Lutheran Hospice, and it was on North 175th Street in Overbrook. Then he opened up two more called the Lutheran Settlement Streets in downtown Philadelphia, and those were at the corner of 20th and Race Street. So already right then and there, he's opening up. And basically what a hospice is, it's kind of like just a youth home. And of course, in this process, Frank really thought, he had found his calling. He knew what God wanted him to do. He sank his whole heart into these boys' homes. And here's the thing, they were actually very successful. It was the growth and all the good that he was doing, and the quick, kind of rapid, growth. In fact, it was so good that he decided, and in fact, there's a Luther Hospice. There's a description from the Intermission Society, but he also, was again thinking big, and in fact, he decided to actually write this on October 8th, a 17-page handwritten document to the trustees of the Intermission Society of the Evangelical Lutheran Church. There's a long mouthful, but in this 17-page document, it's amazing because he actually wrote down the plan that he wanted for the future of these boys' homes. He was thinking of pretty much expanding, opening a couple of more, going to different states. He was really thinking that this could be, why God put him on earth. And most importantly, he is asking for money. And as it, and the story in our rooms was there was a discussion or a problem with the food budget, but again, this was just a kind of like a blueprint for what he had in mind for the future. And the thing was, is the Lutheran Church actually had no money to give him. And long story short, they basically, instead of supporting him with his idea of, thinking big and, all the good he's doing now and what he could do, they actually told him, you actually have to reel it back in, Frank. You got to, cut some of this stuff. And he didn't really like that. And of course, the response was, no, we can't help. And this is where resentment started, at least for Frank. Now, again, he's going to he takes the resentment kind of to the level that we do. He ends up leaving his position at the hospice. He just kind of picks up and leaves. He also leaves his church, totally walks away from that. In fact, he walks away from the United States altogether, and he basically goes overseas. And it's described that after touring France, Germany, he actually lands in England, and he kind of plans this, but he's actually attending the 1908 Keswick Convention Christian Conference, known as Keswick Week. Now, what is this? It is a definite evangelical type gathering. In fact, here's a photo of the one for 1908. But again, it was considered a large function for that time frame. In fact, for this particular one, there's even a full page newspaper article in New Zealand talking about the Keswick Convention. But that's exactly what it looks like. Kind of, you'd all pile into this tent. Hundreds of people would basically get together and, they hear all kinds of evangelical speakers. In fact, this was the the equivalent of the Friday night and Saturday night speakers. That kind of talk during this particular event. There's a lot of names there. Now, this doesn't mention any of the stuff that's going off to the side, the meeting after the meeting or the side little, workshops. These are basically just the keynote speakers have you. And again, not to mention, all the stuff that's going on to the side. So this was a big deal. And Frank's in this crowd somewhere where he's walking around. Here's another photo of the same thing. But again, you can clearly see that this was a particular function. Now, Frank actually had a mission when he was here. He had one thing particular that he wanted to talk to, and his name was Franklin Botherton Meyer. Who happened to be at that time one of the main advocates for something called silent meditation. And of course, he had this saying, silent meditation as a means of being inspired by God. Let no day pass without its season of silent waiting before God. Now, here's the thing about this. He wrote a book called The Secrets of Guidance, and how that particular thing works. If you sit down and you ask God for, basically direction or inspiration or a sign or help, you have to quiet the mind so that the answers can come. You know, I can do that today. A lot of times I confuse God's voice with my voice, and that, we refer to it as bouncing our great ideas off our sponsor. But again, at this early time frame, it was the art of this quiet, meditation. It kind of all wraps up into one, and it was the secrets of guidance. Now, here would be a God shot. It just so happened that FB Meyer was not at the conference, so Frank kind of bummed around and wasn't, not entirely happy that the guy that he wanted to talk to wasn't there. It's described in their archive and from him, his own recollections, that he was kind of depressed, and it seems as though he was heading out of town when he came across this. This is the Tithe Barn Chapel, and of course this was in Keswick. And I like this particular photograph because, as you can see, it's kind of right next to the bus station. So unknown if he was on his way out, but he definitely wasn't, still harboring that resentment. In fact, it's described that he's just walking down the street and he sees the sign seen here, and just so happens that there was one particular person in there giving a talk, And it's interesting because she was actually not attached to this convention, but she is a really, really heavyweight. Her name is Jessie Penn Lewis, and she actually puts the evangelical speaker. She is some hardcore stuff. If you ever read any of her books, take it in small doses. It's amazing stuff. She was also a spokesperson for the Salvation Army. Now, she was in this chapel, not attached to the convention, but she was just there, and she was given this talk on something specific. Basically, it was the centrality of the cross. Now, when you boil it all down, it was, in short, the crucifixion of Jesus Christ in detail. What led up to that? All the ill will that is described with the crucifixion, and then actually what Jesus did and what the cross stood for. And she actually is quoted as saying the centrality of the cross, of course, is the cross is the pivot point in the Christian life. It is where we change from dead to alive, from sinner to saint, from orphan to child of God. So it kind of sounds like a spiritual, change. And of course, as he listened, he's in there. He decides to go in. He sits down. He's just, rattling in his own head, listening to, everything on one hand, the negative. He's hooking up with what led up to the crucifixion of Christ, and then at the flip side, the basically what it is and what it means. And he just so happens he hooking up with everything she's saying. He's honest with himself at this point, and basically kind of internally he realizes that he is full of anger, fearfulness, dishonesty. He is absolutely full of ill will and being self-consumed, especially on the negative side. But at the same time, he also hooks up with, the other, what he used to, love, unselfishness, self-sacrificing, pure at heart, strength and salvation, uplifted spirit, and following God's will. Now, as she's talking, he's hooking up with everything, and all of a sudden, it just hits him how wrong he had been in harboring this ill will. Frank kind of had a spiritual experience or a psychic change, and it was right there where he realized he had to look inside himself and surrender to God's will, kind of like whatever happens, it happens for a purpose or a reason. And it was right at that particular point where he decides to let go of his selfishness and allow God to guide him. The purpose why he was there, again, Secrets of Guidance with F.B. Meyer. So you can kind of see all this stuff is slowly coming together. He also realized another aspect, how corrosive his ill will was. He saw the need to set right the wrongs he had done as a means of clearing his conscience, especially to the Lutheran Church, because he thinks he did some pretty heavy stuff. Now, in the following weeks, it's described that he sent 6 letters to the trustees of the Lutheran Church. And of course, he is described as saying, I thought of those 6 men back in Philadelphia who I felt had wronged me. They probably had, but I got so mixed up in the wrong that I was the 7th wrong man. Right in my conviction, I was wrong in harboring ill will. So he writes these letters and sends them off. And it's interesting, one of them actually survived. It was addressed to Dr. J.F. Olin. It's in the Mount Airy archives. And of course, basically in this letter, he sums it up. He says, I am writing to tell you that I have harbored an unkind feeling toward you. At times I conquered it, but it always came back. Our views may differ, but as brothers, we must love. I write to ask your forgiveness and to assure you that I love you and trust by God's grace I shall never more speak unkindly or despairingly of you. And that's some amazing stuff. It's a long letter. He goes on quoting Bible verses and even some hymns. But it was that last part that kind of took me by surprise. This Dr. Owen has no idea that Frank Buchman's going around talking crap about him, but Frank knows it, and Frank actually makes an amends for that. And again, pretty fascinating stuff. But this was one of the 6 letters that he sent, and of course it's just an amazing chain of events. This is actually from their archive as well, and you can see these aren't actual letters. I think they did this for effect. But another person who was on the board at the time was Dr. Alexander R. L. And basically, he used these things to clear his conscience, right? To make amends, kind of like what Dr. Bob finally did. He finally went around and made the amends that he would never make. But Frank realized that in order to get over the ill will, he had to do something about it. And of course, afterwards, right? He's quoted as saying, "And a new sense of buoyant life had come. I returned to the house feeling a powerful urge to share my experience." He's experiencing the freedom. Again, Frank had this new purpose in life, almost the way it was when he started with the boys' homes. He thought about how his new insights into this spiritual practice could help the world, basically how to produce this spiritual revival that he experienced in Keswick and others. And so, like a mad scientist, he does some unofficial sharing of these spiritual thoughts with evangelical students at Cambridge University, kind of hit or miss. And then he does the exact same thing with a group of students at Oxford University. And it's here where he basically begins to expand his thoughts on his surrender experience from Jesse Penn Lewis in Keswick. Now, again, what actions produce personal spiritual change? Frank started with what caused his own surrender experience. First of all, he was honest with himself, right? Truthfulness and the honesty. He realized, that he had been in ill will and what he was doing was kind of wrong. He also realized that, pure at heart, right versus wrong, what the cross stood for, purity, right? Also unselfishness and self-sacrificing versus selfishness. He was asking for all kinds of stuff that he just couldn't have. And of course, from there, and obviously, what Jesus stood for, unconditional love towards all. And when you add all those up, you got honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. Again, that's kind of a stretch. But when you add it all together, they are considered, again, some of the first inklings of what we refer to as the four absolutes. And this is an interesting thing. At this earliest time frame when he's playing around with the universities, they're actually Bible verses, and they're nothing new. They've actually been around for a while. In fact, from here, uh, pretty much the point of origin goes all the way to this gentleman right here, Robert Elliott Spear, who actually wrote a book called The Principles of Jesus. And in this book, he actually called them the absolute standards. And of course, there were several of them. There was about 20 or so, but the truth, unselfishness, purity, and love were definitely in the top 10. But this Robert Elliott Spear kind of gets the I would say first dibs. Now, what's interesting about this Robert Elliott Spear is, lo and behold, Robert Elliott Spear will actually have a direct interaction with a certain gentleman who also we're going to meet in a couple of slides. His name was Reverend Samuel Shoemaker, and it was at Princeton University. And so this is just an interesting connection made. Buchman, there's no real evidence that he interacted with Spear and at an early time frame, but he wrote that book, Principles of Genius and Jesus. And of course, Shoemaker has a direct interaction with Spear. There was another gentleman who actually used these four absolutes. His name was Henry Burt Wright. And this is where Buchman actually kind of got this. He taught at the Divinity School at Yale University. It's described that he also had a book called The Will of God in a Man's Life Work that was published in 1909. And of course, Buchman just had to do it, and it's described that he made the 4-hour plus train ride from Penn Station to Hartford when he returns to the U.S. and attends these classes and kind of gets the lowdown scoop with this honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love, along with several others. And again, these aren't new. They've actually been around a lot earlier. They were used by professors Horace Bushnell, Henry Drummond, William James, also linked to Emmett Fox's Sermon on the Mount. So they have been in operation for a while, but it's how we apply them. And it's from here, again, around 1910, Frank forms this at least rudimentary action plan. Again, we looked at the Bible verses, and that's kind of where it came from. But he also starts, this procedure thing. Now, see if any of this sounds familiar. The earliest version of this I can find is pretty spectacular. Number one, the sharing of our sins and temptations with another Christian life given to God, and using sharing as witness to help others still unchanged to recognize and acknowledge their sins. And sins can be anything in that blocks your connection with God. And it's interesting how they describe that. But sharing his witness, that's what happened when he got in trouble back in Mount Airy. He wouldn't share his stuff, and of course, once he did, he sought the value in that. So number two was surrender our life, past, present, and future, into God's keeping and direction. See if that sounds familiar. Number three was restitution to all he had wronged directly or indirectly. I like how they put indirectly there. And of course, number four, listening and accepting and relying on God's guidance and carrying it out in everything we do or say, great or small. And what's really cool about that is he actually eventually did hook up with FB Meyer and got the pretty good detail on the practice of guidance. So when you look at this, they're in sentence form, but at the time they were just kind of the words. They were the sharing as witness, surrender, restitution, and guidance. Very short, very simple, and of course, when you apply those to our 12 steps, it's pretty fascinating. But from around 1910, he had this action plan, and he decides to come back to the U.S. In fact, he sets up shop here at Penn State University, and of course, his job was this. It was Frank. The YMCA, and he's basically the general secretary for the Young Men's Christian Association. In fact, it's a great description of who he is and what he does. It's described that he was a man who believes that the best way to make friends is to be one. And of course, that was his initial. Now, it wasn't just him. There was another gentleman. His name was James Lawrence Blair Buck. And James Lawrence was actually a grad student, and it was he and Buchman that kind of took the YMCA and ran with it. Now, here's the thing about Penn State University, and it was almost from the beginning that Frank noticed that there was something wrong. In fact, he described that his first night there, he shows up carrying 2 suitcases, and he walks through one of these crazy drinking parties where hazing was big, and you could just imagine Frank Lutheran, really, really, evangelically based, watching crazy drunk people do, college stuff, just kind of, oh dear, oh, good Lord, look at that, as he's walking through to his position. Now, again, not a lot's changed since then at Penn State. In fact, back then, the Penn State team was known for its drinking. When their sporting teams played other teams, they were known as an easy win because of whatever team they were playing. The Penn State team was almost always drunk. And that's a unique description of Penn State at that time. So here's the thing. 1911 and 1912, Frank Buchman and, of course, James Lawrence Blair Buck, they're kind of looking around, seeing is there anything we can do to help, stem this tide? How do we get people, turned around and in the other direction? 2 of those guys are looking around, kind of what's the problem? And they both land on one person in particular. And I think I just deleted the slide, but it's alcoholic number 1, and I did delete the slide. That was one of the ones I deleted. Sorry about that. But we're looking at a alcoholic number 1. His name was William Bill Pickle, or William Gilliland, and you can kind of see them. That's a family photograph of Bill Pickle there. He was the grand custodian of Penn State University. He was also the local bootlegger. In fact, he supplied all the alcohol to the campus. And going from that slide to this slide, you can see he had a lot of support. So he was making a lot of alcohol. He had 12 kids to feed, 2 grandkids, huge family, and of course, just a picture of his shack. And God, I love that. Again, unpainted, just kind of off to the side. It wasn't part of anything, but just an amazing, little kind of rendition. It's not a major house, but you can imagine all 12 people living in there. He was definitely, one of us. Now, it's suggested that this whole thing kind of started out as a bet. Now, here's the thing. Blair Buck stated that he would try his approach, and if it was successful on changing Mr. Pickle there, Blair would win. And of course, if he lost, then Frank would try. And of course, he tried this this new process that he had acquired, and if it was successful in changing Mr. Pickle there, Frank would win the bet. And of course, as it is, Blair, went in and started reading Bible verses and, bringing them to church and, setting up praying. And of course, it did not work. But when Frank came in and had his attempt, he actually brought him through the same process. He brought him through the surrender, the sharing his witness, the guidance, living in those four absolutes. And of course, again, did it work or not? Well, it did work. And of course, this is an interesting photograph of the Penn State 1912 YMCA, and it's kind of a group photograph. And when you blow it all up, you can see Blair Buck in the background. You can see Frank Buckman there. And then of course, there's Mr. Bill Pickle and his mustache. I should mention that he had a wild mustache. I would consider, him as the four-time running champion of Mustache of the Year award for Penn State University. But it's, he actually had this change. Now, here's the thing: it wasn't just something small, and this is the first alcoholic that they actually applied it to specifically to get over alcoholism. And it was around 1910. And here is again is 13 and 14 Penn State YMCA campout. And what's really interesting, again, if you look at everybody, there's Blair Buck, there's Frank Buckman, and there's Mr. Bill Pickle. And Mr. Bill Pickle is bringing his wife, and of course they are both involved. And what's really interesting is there's another gentleman in this particular photograph. His name is Edwin Earl Sparks. He's the president of Penn State University now. Up to this point, again, this one time frame, it went from kind of a transition here. In fact, this Edwin Earl Sparks actually gets credit for turning the Penn State reputation back to good standing, almost from hazing back to helping, especially starting student organizations, extracurricular activities, the whole 9 yards. Now, again, I just find it fascinating that here he is with Buckman and the YMCA. But again, this whole thing just kind of starts to come together, and no direct links or any of that stuff, but here they are all together. Mr. Bill Pickle. In fact, it all started basically from this: Frank Buckman and alcoholic number one Bill Pickle. I particularly like this photograph because this is basically how I imagine it started. Frank just sat down and started kind of sharing his witness, sharing his experience, almost like a speaker meeting. And again, walking them through how to surrender, what a surrender means, and so on and so forth. And it really worked. In fact, this guy actually, this is jumping ahead. This is 1936. Picture, but again, you can clearly see Mr. Bill Pickle standing in between in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, an Indian chief, and of course Loudon Hamilton, who is also again another jump back in that goes up to the America Awake campaign. And I should have taken this out, but what's fascinating is he's actually the Oxford Group's National Assembly, the America Awake campaign. People who were actually talking here were Victor Kitchen, I Was a Pagan, Stephen Footlife, who wrote Life Began Yesterday, Reverend Sam Shoemaker did 2 sermons there, Mr. and Mrs. Francis Shep Cornell, who was one of the interactions with Ebby Thatcher. He and his wife both did a thing. Bill Pickle also shared his testimony, sharing his witness, and a gentleman by the name of Sir Philip Dundas, who was an Oxford grouper, and if you're in Europe, he actually has an amazing interaction with the start of AA in Scotland. In fact, latter after 36 into the 40s, Oxford group didn't keep him sober, but AA did. And there's a picture of Sir Philip Dundas with Bill Wilson, who's mentioned in other articles. Of course, attending this is Roland Hazard of Peacedale, Rhode Island. So pretty interesting. And of course, there's Loudon Hamilton. But even at that early time frame, they applied it towards alcoholism, and it worked. In fact, the whole thing can be described in Four Sinners Only by A.J. Russell. In fact, if you look on page 159, it basically sums it up. It talks about the Bill Pickle, the bootlegger, a cultured and popular graduate student who was Blair Buck, and the college dean, Sparks, Frank Agnostic, whose wife was an earnest Christian. Great little story there. And of course, this is just an interesting photograph of Frank, Bill Pickle, the student who was Blair Buck, and of course, his future wife, Mrs. Buck. So, kind of down the road, everybody getting back together. And, this is definitely a rabbit hole, so I apologize to this. But if you're actually in Penn State University, you can go to Bill Pickle's tap room, and they have all kinds of neat information on the walls. But he's still a local legend in the area. But as of recently, that is still there, up and running. In fact, we got that photograph from the tap room. Ironic, it's a bar, I know, but pretty fascinating. So here's the long story short. Frank stayed at Penn State University all the way until 1914. It was here where he actually begins a series of world travelers. He seeks spiritual insight. He begins to share his method of action with other people. One of the places is 1915. He goes to India. Here he is walking the countryside with Gandhi and a fellow kind of early member, Bishop Henry Whitehead. In fact, here's another photograph of Frank Buchman with Gandhi. But here's the thing, he describes, he thought it was going to be some kind of awe-inspiring moment, but he wasn't really excited about his interaction with Gandhi. He actually got more out of talking with other people that were in the area at the time. In fact, he actually is learning a lot from several individuals that really expanded his scope of spirituality. One was this guy, Sam Higginbottom. He was a Christian missionary. He was a college professor. He founded the Allahabad Agricultural Institute in India. Talked with him a great deal. Got a lot of good knowledge from this guy, Rabindranath Tagore, who was a Bengali poet, writer, music composer, and painter. He had just won the Nobel Prize for Literature and had been knighted by the Queen in 1915. And most importantly was this, Amy Carmichael, who was a Christian missionary, opened one of the most successful orphanages in India. And it was basically what he was doing when he first got started with the orphanages and his youth hostels. So he got a lot of really amazing spiritual kind of depth and weight from these. And this whole time he's kind of mixing and matching and sharpening and adding to and this belief system. Now we're going to take a little step aside, and we're going to introduce kind of the yin to Frank Buchman's yang, and we're going to talk about Sam Shoemaker. In fact, Samuel Moore Shoemaker, eventually Dr. Samuel Moore Shoemaker. Now, Bill Wilson considers Sam Shoemaker a co-founder of AA because of his spiritual insight and emphasis on actions. He is an action guy, actions that needed to be taken in order to change. And, long story short, he was a Baltimore guy, born in Baltimore, December 27th of 1893. There's a picture of young Sam on the farm with his, livestock. In fact, I'm not sure what happened there, but Sam Shaker, as a boy, shown with his farm pets. Little could Sam Shoemaker guess that his writings and ministry would change the lives all over the world. And I'm not sure what's going on here, but it keeps moving. And it's described that he actually went to school at St. George's Episcopal School in Newport, Rhode Island. Did very well. In fact, progressed and got into Princeton University starting in 1913. Received his Bachelor of Arts in 1916. Now, it was here in Princeton where his passion for religion grows. His path of religious devotion again starts aggressively expand, and it all took place there in New Jersey. Originally, he got involved with the St. Paul Society. Again, his entire stay, he was either in one form of spiritual society or another. Got his start here at the St. Paul's, which is Catholic, but has religious aspirations all throughout. And what's interesting is It was also here at Princeton University that he interacts with Dr. Robert Elliott Spear. And from there, he actually joins the Philadelphia Society junior and senior year, and basically was elected as president, which puts him in a direct interaction because Spear was on the board of trustees. Now, in fact, again, that's pretty much what that says. But they interact with each other, and of course, when you look at the Princeton University class of 1916, when you look at a lot of photographs of Sam, he doesn't like the limelight. He's not in the center of things. He doesn't want to be the focus. He's kind of off to the side in the lurches. And if you can pick Sam's face out of that, it's quite amazing, because there he is right there. He's all the way off to the corner. Just kind of, he doesn't, if that says anything, he doesn't want notoriety. He just wants to help. And that's a theme that carries through his entire life. And I would say that's what, helps him to be so successful and helping individuals and changing lives. He ended up graduating with a Bachelor of Arts in 1916. He is mentioned as hopefully attending the Cambridge Theological Seminary. Here's the note. In 1917, the Philadelphia Society seemed to join forces with the YMCA. The missionary swing seems to develop like overnight, and immediately upon commencement, Sam signed on for additional services. Summer beginning 1917, Sam did missionary work for the troops in New England, troops of New England, guarding the Texas border down south. He counseled and entertained them, and he was secretary for the Philadelphia Society from 17 to 18. Here is again a description of that whole entire thing from the Philadelphia Brick-Brack yearbook. Again, there were just a handful of people, but there he is down there, S.M. Shoemaker Jr., 1916, and with the YMCA and Texas. This is another interesting little thing. This was April 20th of 1917. This basically tells his story going overseas. What's really fascinating, I think, again, this was a letter of intent for him acting on behalf of the YMCA for the war effort. And again, going over and doing the European theater for that time frame, World War One. And of course, this is the newspaper article that coincides with it. It's basically, this group of Princeton professors and students are actually heading over to do the ministry, and there's Sam kind of buried in the thing. It's described that he actually stayed in Kent at Camp Sandwich and also Folkestone, and eventually down there. And you can kind of just see, again, this is definitely a rabbit hole. Another same thing, but a little clearer of a photograph. But there he is, the men of Princeton heading overseas. What's really fascinating is when he comes back, he doesn't stop there. He keeps going. In fact, there's a great little newspaper article, September 26th, 1917, on page 5 in the Baltimore Sun. And of course, it basically says that Sam Shoemaker Jr., who returned a short time ago from England, where he did Young Men's Christian Association work in the English training camps for about 4 months, has left Vancouver, BC, and will sail tomorrow for China. So now he's heading all the way over to China. And China is actually a pretty big deal. In fact, what's really fascinating, again, Princeton set up this Princeton to China program he signed on for. They actually had this huge interaction. This was the Princeton Center in China, and he actually was his job, or his position, was to teach mathematics and English and minister the Chinese. But there was a tiny little problem. He spoke no Chinese, and they didn't speak English. So, it starts to kind of, I wouldn't say frustrate him, but it definitely, starts to weigh on him. And of course, there's the yearbook, Princeton to China description there. But the slender thread is how did Buchman and Shoemaker meet? And long story short, it just so happened that one of the presidents of China actually invited Christian everything to China, and of course actually invited Frank Buchman at the end of 16 to do YMCA missionary work all throughout the country. And what's cool is he actually came. So you had Buchman and Shoemaker, and this is a picture of Frank Buchman with Bishop Herbert Roots, who was actually in the kind of the circle of Sam Shoemaker. It's a great little like house party. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. But Frank toured all around China, sharing his ideas of spiritual change, all the provinces and all the major cities. And it just so happens, again, how did they meet? Well, can you imagine, it's described it happened on a train somewhere in the middle of China, kind of two white guys, hey, what are you doing here? Are you with the YMCA? And of course, they kind of hit it off. It's described they met on a train, the conversation starts, and Sam begins to share his frustrations. In fact, Frank tells him about his own conversion experience that happened in Keswick. So he's again starting him through the process. He talks about, living in these resentments and ill will. He tells Shoemaker to surrender and let God direct him. Kind of talk about these four little simple actions: the surrender, the sharing his witness, guidance, restitution. Learns how to live in the four absolutes as a mean of being of personal spiritual change. And what's fascinating is Shoemaker actually describes this process. He recollects, or it's described, that he saw his ills or his sins, pop up like tombstones, and he could see them so clearly in that process. It's a great description. They end up talking about forming a group based on this new manner of life. He too has a spiritual change, and he's like, wow, this is really good stuff. Two men basically hold this first little group. They call it a house party, and took place in China, and they decide on a name, and it was basically the first century Christian fellowship, and other versions is a or the first century Christian fellowships, but this is pretty much where it starts. Now, the amazing thing is this interaction, it didn't happen on a train in Baltimore, Maryland. It didn't happen in New Jersey. It didn't happen in New York. It happened 7,186 miles away, somewhere in China. And again, they think they got something because whatever they're starting, and it seems to be working. What they have so far, they have the four absolutes: honesty, purity, unselfishness, and love. They also fine tune how to apply the absolute as a manner of life. They also have the four little procedures called sharing as witness, surrender, restitution, and guidance. But there's an interjection of a new process that will also kind of come into play. And of course, it was 1919 when Harold Arnold Walters writes a book called Soul Surgery. And in this book, he talks about a new spiritual concept called the 5 C's. And it is confidence, confession, conviction, conversion, and continuance. And of course, how the 5 C's actually work. First off, you had the confidence. See if any of this sounds familiar. The new person had to have confidence in you and know you would keep his secrets. The confession, honesty about the real state of a person's life. Convictions, the seriousness of his sin and the need to be free of it. Conversion, the process had to be the person's own free will and the decision to surrender to God. And of course, continuance, you were responsible as a life changer to help the new person become all that God wanted him to be. And when you boil that down, boy, does that sound a lot like sponsorship. And again, this is what they were working with. And so they hook up, but Frank, kind of bounces around. Here he is again, movements in China, seen here. Again, from there, it's also described he comes back and gets a job as a professor at Hartford Theological Seminary. In fact, here's a couple of descriptions of him taking the position. Sam Shoemaker is also continuing education. In fact, he becomes a deacon at the Episcopal Church, probably near Princeton University, but is described as a full-time employee of the Philadelphia Society in the middle of the Princeton campus. And of course, there's just a neat little description of that, plus a picture of the chapel behind there on campus. And it was also here where he decides to write his first book called Realizing Religion. It's an amazing description. In fact, It basically sums it up. It contains substantially the ideas which pass between two persons, frankly, considering spiritual matters in conversation and correspondence, selected and arranged, of course, for more orderly presentation. My friend underwent in a comparatively brief time a renovation of life, a change in radical ideas, a conversion. It's basically what Frank Buchman experienced when he was in Tyburn Chapel. And of course, now they have something and it seems to be working. Uh, Going down the road, again, during his deaconship, Sam attends General Theological Seminary. And a friend of mine loves to point out that he was a very bright, had a knack for it. In fact, he was kind of fast tracked through it and got advanced placement there, and was ordained as an Episcopal priest in 1921. He did a very short little stint at Grace Episcopal Church down in New York City in Manhattan. Very short, but he got the experience. And of course, from there, he basically gets into the position of Reverend Samuel Shoemaker. Now, Reverend Shoemaker, along with Frank Beckman and some evangelical students, they actually tour all around India, New England, and they hold these house parties as the first century Christian fellowship. And just to give you an idea of what one of these house parties looks like, there's a great photograph that shows pretty much in action. And when you look, it's a lot of young people, and it's all like-minded. It's very casual, and I like to point out that they're wearing coat and ties. They're taking it pretty serious. But you can actually see Sam Shoemaker in the back, again, getting together, talking about God, talking about spiritual matters. And that basically sums up what these early house parties kind of look like. They were very informal. They were often in halls. They were never really in churches. They were in people's homes. They were in parks. They were wherever you could congregate, and that basically kind of summed it up. He did that from 1921 to the winter of 1923-24. I don't know why that's blank. I'm pretty sure something important went there, but uh, looking again, this sums it up too. This was 1923 North America, and it kind of shows what this group would go around and perform at places. And of course, in this particular one, you can see Sam Shoemaker there. You can see Frank Buchman there. There's a whole lot of other very influential people also in this photograph, but it represents what they did with these house parties, and now they're bringing it back to the States. In fact, here's a newspaper article of them getting in the Union Mission in New York. Again, it describes the function here. Frank Buchman, as well as I like this photograph with Sherwood Day, and of course Loudon Hamilton. They're signing on for this. But what's really interesting is this particular article talking about celebrating on the date at the International Union Mission in New York City. It basically sums up that the first century Christian fellowship, its message by Frank Buchman, basically what it is, how it changes folks. The history by Sherwood Day, I would guess probably how Frank and each of the individuals had their little spiritual experience. It talks about the work that they are doing at the moment. And of course, changing lives. Frank Buchman probably talks about the process, those procedures, the 5 C's, the 4 absolutes, the whole 9 yards. Then there's a little bit about the International Union Mission by Miss Alma Doring of Africa. And what's really fascinating is this last one. It was the racetrack of the world, a guy by the name of Mr. Frank Goodman, the ex-gambler. So again, 1912, Focus on an Alcoholic from the Word Go with Bill Pickle. Now by 1923 refers to another ailment or another kind of harm, maybe. Frank Goodman, the ex-gambler, all of a sudden he sees the light. Also suggests more conditions that benefit change, and I think that's might be a good place to round it out. But again, you can kind of see, you know, everybody in this particular photograph. There's, of course, Sam Shoemaker off to the side doing what he does, you know, kind of in the lurches. He's like the shadow worker. And of course, Frank Buchman, the limelight, kind of tells you, you know, he definitely, again, from here. And going really quick into the winter of 23, this was where Sam Shoemaker actually lands probably one of the most pivotal positions. He becomes rector of Calvary Church in New York City, and there's a picture of the church. 1925, he became rector. 1926, he opened Calvary Mission, which is a couple of blocks away. And then in 1928, he actually opened the house right behind it. It was a building, and they called that the Calvary House. In 26, it was the Mission. And of course, it was 346 East 23rd Street, just a couple of blocks away. And long story short, this is actually where Ebby Thatcher will eventually get sober. And a great description on how they actually landed on the name Calvary Mission. Again, February 1st, 1926. And when we boil it down, you can clearly see Sam Shoemaker on the Calvary Evangel description, and of course the Calvary Mission with the address of 346, and Mr. Henry Hadley II, whose uncle is Samuel Hadley, and described in the Spiritual Conversions in William James's variety of religious experience, and Mr. Kenneth Adams, also known as Tex Adams, who will actually be the superintendent when Ebby joins, and kind of lays the groundwork for at least Calvary Mission. But you know, pretty neat is this particular photograph. This is an etching done by a famous Bruce Brain's father, who was had the inscription at the bottom called the Carpenter. It's a place nearby where a carpenter still mends broken men. And of course, with the Calvary Evangel and Sam Shoemaker, that was Calvary Church, and right behind it was Calvary House. And it was in here where he did most of his work. This was where kind of the claim or the stake of home base for the future Oxford group, the First Century Christian Fellowship in America. And when you boil it all down, Sam Shoemaker started something off to the side. We were talking about it earlier. It was called Faith It Works. It was this tiny little gathering of like-minded individuals who focused on, you know, bettering themselves and change. And I think that's a great place to start, and that kind of rounds out the cycle for Dr. Sam Shoemaker. And yeah, so I'm going to take a breath, drink some water, and Rob, I thank you for allowing me to share. Hopefully, I didn't screw it up. So
you did fantastic, Drew. If you want to unmute yourself and say thank you to Drew, by all means.
Thank you, Drew.
Thanks, Drew.
Thank you,
Thank you so much.
Beautiful.